Hello, my Richies, and welcome back to another episode of the Make Life Rich Movement podcast. My name is Sara. I'm your host. And in today's episode, we are discussing the psychology of forgiveness and its purpose in faith. Before we get started, if you are watching this via video, it just drives my empathy insane to notice that something physically is different with a favorite podcast host of mine when I'm watching their videos, and then they don't discuss it. And I won't do that to you. So if you're watching this, I have a Band-Aid on my nose. I had to have a skin growth removed and checked. So if you are of the praying kind, I would appreciate very greatly if you would say a little prayer for the tests that I had done to come back free and clear and of no worry at all. It would mean a lot. So getting back to today's episode, man, I think we all have someone inside of us that we are holding on to a little bit of resentment towards. And maybe we're doing it out of just the sheer hope of protecting ourselves from this person ever being able to get close to us and hurt us again. But as I've come to learn, especially over the last few years, few months even, at 40 years of age, carrying resentment towards someone that had betrayed my trust many, 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 many times over a lifetime was really only punishing me. And it was punishing me in the fact that I was the one changing my behavior to not really be around this person or have to interact with them or just be a victim to their just very callous way of being with me particularly. And it took during my Bible study over the last almost 9 months of getting to know Jesus and the Bible to hear the parables within the Bible that discuss just the way in which I'm blocking my own blessings by holding on to resentment and not giving the gift of forgiveness to another person because I'm not willing to forgive them for their transgressions. But I, on the same hand, am expecting God to keep blessing me with the things I'm asking for. And in essence, forgive me for my transgressions because we all have them. But I'm not willing to give it to my fellow man. I think there was a really big aha moment for me that allowed me to free myself from that equation that I had learned that I and I alone was trapped in. The person that I was keeping at arm's length, it was only fueling their fire. It wasn't making their behavior really become any more docile than I wish it would have become. It, in fact, fueled the fire and made it worse. There's a lot of psychological curiosity about, what if forgiveness isn't just a nice spiritual idea, but it is a psychological necessity that our brains and hearts are really not only wired to receive, but are actually designed to need. And that was big. Just recognizing the freedom that came to my heart after being able to accept the truth that I and I alone was keeping myself in this vicious cycle of just resenting this person that not only didn't know I didn't care. If they would have known, they wouldn't have cared, and they wouldn't have done anything about it to correct the relationship and put things back to a healthier scale. Now, research shows that people who practice forgiveness have lower rates of depression, anxiety, stress, physical illnesses, which is suggesting that forgiveness might be essential for mental health as an exercise for routine longevity of your health and keeping some of these things at bay that are very much the match to the gasoline of our health just going absolutely down the toilet. We need autonomic, just nervous response being at an even keel. And if we're constantly in a space of holding on to resentment or feelings of negativity or sadness or upset with someone, we are keeping ourselves in a status that the psychological cost of unforgiveness is so severe that our capacity for forgiveness might be one of the biggest survival instincts that we have at our very fingertips and can use at our will today, which is insane. So, what can I promise you about this episode? We're going to explore what psychology reveals about forgiveness and how this understanding is going to deepen our appreciation for why God is calling us to forgive in the first place. We're going to examine the neurological, the emotional, and the relational impacts of both forgiveness and of unforgiveness to try to understand why this practice is essential to human flourishing. We all want to feel better. We all want to be connected with as many people in a positive manner as we can be. And this episode is going to help you to be able to achieve just that. I'm going to share some practical insights from psychology research that can help you forgive more effectively and understand the spiritual purposes behind God's commandments and command to forgive. Now, what is the neuroscience of forgiveness? What happens when we don't forgive, right? Let's start there. So, the brain's response to hurt and betrayal is kind of intertwined with threat detection systems. And this is how the brain is processing relational injury, typically emotional injury, right? When someone hurts us, our brain's amygdala, which is the fear center, treats the experience as a survival threat, creating lasting neural pathways that associate that person or similar situations with danger. This is where you're going to get your triggers from, your traumatic reactions from. This is where that inner child healing, the need for it is from these interactions that are bringing harm to the person. These threat detection responses are designed to protect us from physical harm, but when applied to emotional hurt, they can create permanent states of hypervigilance, constantly searching out if your surroundings are safe emotionally, when that type of response should only be applied to your physical well-being rather than your emotional well-being. So we are absolutely just stuck in this defensive reactivity physically within our body because our head and our heart are not firing and wiring together with the proper information, because over time emotionally we have come to discover through whatever this traumatic stimuli is, that the life around us is not safe. So, memory consolidation is huge, and it not only is going to give us the ability to reverse the strengthening of unforgiveness and the way in which it severely impacts your traumatic neural pathways. But each time we rehearse a hurtful memory with anger and resentment, we strengthen the neural pathway associated with that trauma, making it more vivid and emotionally charged, but in a negative manner. Unforgiveness essentially trains your brain to just keep living that traumatic experience over and over and over, keeping it fresh and present and top of mind, preventing that natural healing state and that process that allows these painful memories to fade and lose their emotional intensity. Within the phase of my life where I started realizing how much my triggers and my memories were kind of causing me to live in this heightened state, I started implementing and working on guided visualizations, the vision tendon work that I do, and trying to address that shadow work inside, that inner child healing that had not only never been even like seen and like, okay, I see you, this is a real thing for me, but I'd never even attempted to give it any kind of validity and then address it. And allowing your brain to just keep running in the direction of taking you up a hill with no line chasing you behind you is one of the quickest ways to earn yourself a stroke, high blood pressure, heart attacks, embolisms, etc., because you are wired to just burn hot. Your steam, your kettle is always boiling, and it is not good for you. But there are ways in which we will be able to reverse engineer these neural pathways that are leading you towards that traumatic, negative, rewired part of your brain that used to be healthy and used to be able to discern appropriately emotional reactions and the level of defense that was needed to protect yourself. Now, I want to discuss the stress hormone cascade. Cortisol, my friends, is one of the most dangerous little creatures we have lurking in our body naturally. The physiological impact of holding on to hurt is really hurting your body, and not only hurting your body currently, but absolutely damaging any hope of having health in your longevity, of just living a full and complete healthy life in your elder years. Persistent resentment keeps the body in chronic stress response, elevating cortisol levels and triggering these inflammatory responses that affect everything in your body, from your immune health to your cardiovascular health to your hormone health, your reproductive health. And studies show that people who hold grudges have not only higher blood pressure, they also have an increased risk of heart attack, heart disease, and compromised immune systems compared to those who practice forgiveness. I hear you guys. There's certain people you just really, yeah, hold it tight. You don't want to let it go. But let's discuss the psychological prison that is resentment. Finding yourself in a rumination cycle, especially if you're recently triggered over a conversation or something that might have happened within your day to kind of get you to a place of just having it on your brain. And Unforgiveness creates these obsessive thinking patterns that are not only neural loops where the mind repeatedly returns to the offense, analyzing it from every single angle and generating new reasons for anger and hurt. And this rumination actually strengthens the hurt and its neural pathways that your memories are like tunneling down every day rather than resolving it. People stuck in forgiveness often report that they can't stop thinking about the offense even years later, and that their brain has literally been trained to obsess over the injury. This, my friends, is the birthplace of the victimhood or the martyr mentality that is not actually tied to acts of martyrdom within the context of your relationship with God or with Jesus. This is a social martyrdom where you are utilizing the woe is me story of how you were hurt as a way to gain empathy, ill-gotten empathy from others, as a way to work less hard in your life because you're using this victim story as a way to get out of life and avoiding things in life, namely growing and evolving as a person and being accountable for your emotions and the way in which you allow them to control your brain. If your emotions are smarter than your brain, you're in trouble and you have got some rewiring to do. And I say this as a person that was in that place and actively every day is working towards rewiring my brain away from resentment, shame, sadness, and fear. And you can do so too, my friends. Now, there is a bit of, as we said, the victimhood becomes addictive, and it's because of that identity fusion. When being wrong becomes central to one's sense of self or a party identification, this tribalism, but with the focus of this has happened to me without there being a positive space and a system and strategy in place for you to move beyond this pain and take the suffering that was incurred from this pain and use it to grow. If you're not doing that, you are utilizing a title, likely one you gave yourself, so you could fall into a tribe that deserves sympathy, that deserves empathy. And this, my friends, is just simply not the case, not only societally, but spiritually. It's a big old Long-term resentment can cause people to build their identity around being victimized, which we've said, making forgiveness feel threatening because it challenges their sense of who they are. So you've not only worked yourself into this space of victimhood because you refuse to give that forgiveness to someone, but that resentment has taken a central hold on who you are as a person, who you want to be known as to other people, how you carry yourself throughout the world with relations. It's a really scary thing to turn around and recognize that you have made your entire pain and what has happened to you your personality. And when being hurt becomes your central story, forgiveness can feel like you're losing yourself rather than freeing yourself. And again, that psychology of victimhood just becomes an addiction. And it's a dangerous addiction because it's one that no one can tell you is not an addiction, because it will simply come from you squaring up with God and recognizing that you are lamenting on something you should have moved on from years ago. And then you will wake up and you will recognize how much of your life has been wasted in that state, that perpetuation of inaction, because for whatever reason, it felt better for you to stay in a place of resentment and hurt. Now, let's talk about the warping of reality when you keep yourself in a perpetual state of unforgiveness. The cognitive distortions are intense. And I think this is where we find certainly the United States of America these days, but chronic resentment creates cognitive biases that make people interpret neutral events as hostile. They see patterns of persecution where none exists, and they lose the ability to recognize genuine kindness. It's always they've got a hairpin trigger where they're constantly on the defense because they believe that there's no other way to interact with someone because of the resentment they hold in their heart and the forgiveness they refuse to give. The brain's pattern recognition system becomes hypertuned to detect threat and rejection, as we had discussed before, creating a worldview where everyone seems potentially dangerous and untrustworthy. I think that there are certain generations of individuals that have absolutely fallen into this societal plot. And, every day more and more people are waking up from the false reality that has been painted around us. And certainly there's a revival of people just wanting to know more about God, wanting to get to know Jesus, wanting to know what the purpose of life is. What are we doing? What really matters? Because life is not very fulfilling if you don't have your eye on the right prize. And victimhood and refusing to forgive someone is absolutely you taking your ego and placing it above God. You and you alone know what's best for you. And like, you're not going to take any advice from anyone else. Let me just ask you how that's going for you, because I know how it went for me and it wasn't good. I think the big thing here to also consider are your relational and social consequences of refusing to give forgiveness. Trust capacity erosion is huge when you find yourself in a constant place of just defensiveness with interactions with others. And unforgiveness affects your future relationships, even though you may feel like you have a really solid grip on who you want to interact with, how you want to interact with them, and how exactly that relationship's going to play out because you've got it all figured out. And this is where the problem starts. People who hold onto resentment towards one person often develop generalized difficulty trusting others, even those who have never hurt them. I have family members that cling to this way of existing, and it's so hard to not only get them just to be kind to strangers just off the grip, but it takes them a really long time to even speak to people, to allow them into their just general frame of, hey, hello, hi, how you doing? And it's such a segregating, sad way to live. You cannot always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, guys, especially when it comes to people and interactions and interpersonal communication. Like, you're setting yourself up for lonely failure. Okay. Resist. There's also a certain factor of emotional contagion, and bitterness spreads to family and community, which is kind of what I was alluding to before. Some of the people in my life are very much inherently receiving this way of behaving, the victimhood, the resentment as a way of life. Certainly were generational curses that were passed down. And resentment is psychologically contagious. People living with unforgiving individuals often develop higher levels of anxiety, depression, and interpersonal conflict. And children raised by parents who model unforgiveness learn to respond with hurt, or rather, learn to respond to being hurt, being traumatized with resentment rather than healing, perpetuating cycles of bitterness across generations. If you find yourself in the space of a family where you know that it is the way we are, and you're just like really not down with it anymore, from one who has been there, my friend, you will get out of it and you will get ahead. And we're about to get to how you can go about doing that. How does forgiveness heal? And what is the actual psychology of forgiveness? How does the brain interact with forgiveness? Now, what are the neurological changes through forgiveness that we can expect? First, that fear center, the amygdala, and its regulation process, it's what's calming the brain, or it's what's amping up your brain's alarm system. And when people genuinely forgive, brain imaging shows decreased activity in the amygdala and increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, essentially shifting from reactive fear to thoughtful response. You are taking a moment to take in the environment around you. You are processing not only the emotions and the situation given to you by those involved, you're also processing how you're receiving these things, what you feel about these things in the moment. It's a split second thing. It happens so quickly. Forgiveness doesn't erase memories. It changes how the brain processes them, namely those neural pathways that you're having, like snowboarding through every single time you allow resentment and negativity to be going first. And reducing the emotional charge and allowing for a more balanced perspective on past hurts is absolutely going to give you the wide open ability to get into that pink stuff in this head and start to carve out what was your healthy response before it was plagued with all of the psychological derailments of unforgiveness. It's okay. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's get deep on how forgiveness creates these new mental patterns. The act of choosing forgiveness repeatedly, meaning when these situations pop up, you're taking a second, step back, assess, look at what's in front of you, and choose forgiveness. instead of that reaction to go, when you are interrupting that resentment pattern, you are gradually making compassion and understanding more automatic than anger and blame and victimhood. The neuroplasticity explains why forgiveness often feels difficult, and it's because at first your brain is so used to just anger, 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 fear, 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 that your brain is kind of clumsily slaloming all over the bumps in your brain that you're really trying to force it through. It's like building a big gigantic snowman, and then you want to like just you expect to smoothly ride your bicycle through it like you're just driving down the street. You're going to hit some opposition. It's going to take some time to keep driving through that snowman before you clear the new path that is as accessible as that resentment was when you were first engaging with that as your first natural reaction. So when we make these changes to the neuroplasticity, this is where our default mode network changes. Forgiveness affects our self-referential thinking, meaning people who practice forgiveness show decreased activity in the brain regions associated with self-focused rumination and increased activities in tasks and areas linked to empathy and perspective seeking and perspective taking. So, what does that mean? Shifting from self focused injury to other focused understanding is measurable in brain studies and brain scans and correlates with improved mental health outcomes. So, alongside this, what are the emotional and mental health benefits of forgiveness? Stress reduction is first and foremost. Forgiveness is activating the body's relaxation response. Forgiveness triggers the parasympathetic nervous system that we discussed before, reducing your cortisol firing and your adrenaline, these two hormones that are very caustic to your system when they're being inappropriately pumped out all day long. And these are things that we can control, and we should try our very best, because you do not want to mess with cortisol and adrenaline when they're being used and they're not really needed. Now, because cortisol and adrenaline are being pumped out with your parasympathetic nervous system turning on, we're going to get an increase in the feel-good neurotransmitters of serotonin and oxytocin. Because they have lowered, it has given our brain the ability to amp up the serotonin and the oxytocin. These are the chemicals that are released when you get a hug from somebody. So just the simple act of forgiveness is releasing the same chemical hormones that you get when you're in an embrace, and it reduces the hormones that get amped up when you're ready to fight, the cortisol and the adrenaline. People who forgive report immediate physical sensations of relief, a lighter chest, relaxed muscles, deeper breathing, as their nervous system de-escalates and their systems shift out of defensive mode. The mood stabilization of forgiveness is also incredible. And this is not rocket science here, guys, but believe me, when you are stuck in that habit of resentment, you forget how beautiful forgiveness can be, not only for others who are receiving it, but for your overall mood and the way you live your life. So releasing resentment improves emotional regulation for a number of reasons, but primarily it's freeing up massive amounts of mental and emotional energy that were being used to maintain anger and resentment, making that energy available for positive experiences and relationships moving forward. And studies show consistently people who practice forgiveness have lower rates of depression, anxiety, mood disorders, suicide compared to those who hold grudges. Now, when we're looking for cognitive clarity, it is impossible without forgiveness. Forgiveness improves thinking and decision-making processes, because when your brain isn't constantly processing the threat that actually isn't there that you've conditioned your brain to look for, it has the ability to be able to become creative, problem solving. You're able to learn a lot more. You can have a heavier cognitive load, and you have wiser decision-making skills. People often report that after forgiving someone, they can think more clearly about other areas of their life, because forgiveness literally frees them from the mental bandwidth that they were burdened under, that was completely unnecessary and absolutely draining every inch of energy in their body. So, with self forgiveness, there is a component of internal healing. This was another big thing for me when I realized I was holding on to resentment for others. It was because I primarily was holding on to resentment for myself. Shame versus guilt processing was huge for me. And the act of forgiveness with your own self, the self relationship, when you do give yourself the ability to forgive yourself, you again are allowing the brain to process mistakes as specific actions of guilt rather than core identity flaws of shame. This distinction is crucial for psychological healing and growth, and people that can forgive themselves show healthier patterns of learning from mistakes rather than being paralyzed by them, leading to better decision making and personal development. This could be something as big as you cheated on a test in school, in college, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person. Yeah, that's shame. Forgive yourself and don't do it again. And like, make your amends to God and don't do it again. But the act of like spoiling your dinner and like, whoops, you burnt the chicken, like, you're guilty of burning the chicken, but there's no shame in burning the chicken. You know what I mean? Like, we don't always need to place shame on our actions. We must always place guilt if we were responsible for what happened that we're feeling this ick around. But you can transform the way you feel about yourself and what you've done or what you're doing from a place of shame to a place of guilt, and then taking ownership over it and being able to process it and work through it and make sure that you don't do it again. And when you get to the space of forgiveness and forgiving yourself, this is where identity integration takes a positive form and moves forward, allowing for complex self-understanding. Self forgiveness enables people to hold both their failures and their self worth simultaneously, creating more integrated and resilient sense of identity. Psychological integration mirrors both the biblical understanding of being simultaneously a sinner and a saint. We're being loved by God despite our imperfections. And I think there is a lot to be said in, again, if you expect God to forgive you for your sins, you have to forgive yourself first. Now, what does the spiritual design of forgiveness look like? And why does God command what psychology confirms? Forgiveness is a spiritual medicine, and the divine design for healing and how God's commands aligned with psychological health for me were huge. The fact that forgiveness produces measurable mental health benefits suggests that God's commands to forgive aren't an arbitrary moral requirement of the Bible, right? But it's a loving guidance towards not only flourishing for yourself, but for humankind. And psychology is discovering that biblical principles like forgiveness, gratitude, and love aren't just spiritual ideas, but are actual prescriptions for psychological wellness and overall health improvements. Processing hurt through forgiveness is taking your pain and transforming it into wisdom. And redemptive suffering, something I'm very familiar with, and I don't say this lightly, okay? I understand the work at hand here, but we're just taking a general overview of this portion of the conversation, okay? Redemptive suffering requires that your forgiveness not minimize or excuse the harm that happened to you, right? But you want to transform the experience of being hurt into an increased capacity for compassion and wisdom, not only for yourself, but for others. People who have forgiven deep hurts often report that their suffering became meaningful when it increased their ability to help others heal from similar wounds. I can say for me, with the instance of growing up with an ill parent and recently in the last 6 years having lost that parent, the gift that was my suffering over a lifetime is such a shock to me. And the moment that I was able to realize that the suffering was innately a gift, that was when my whole life changed. That was where everything became clear to me. That was where all the trappings of life that kept me down just went, because I knew everything I needed to know about life. I had learned in that suffering in the deepest core of myself, which led to character development. Forgiveness builds spiritual maturity. And that was certainly what happened to me when I was able to transmute my suffering into sweetness, into the gifts of life, into the mercy and blessings of God. The psychological work that was required for genuine forgiveness, perspective taking, empathy, emotional regulation, they're the same capacities that Scripture identifies as fruits of spiritual maturity. God uses the forgiveness process to develop patience, kindness, love, humility, grace, qualities that can't be built through a comfortable life and comfortable circumstances, but really truly requires working through a hurt. Now, how do we free ourselves from the bondage of this hurt while we are doling out the forgiveness? Freedom from the past is given to ourselves when we allow the forgiveness to break cycles of physiological and psychological imprisonment. Resentment keeps us psychologically frozen in past moments of injury, while forgiveness allows us to move forward and create new experiences unburdened by old pain. All happen right here in the dome piece and in your corresponding heart messaging. Biblical language of forgiveness as setting captives free is psychologically accurate. Both the forgiver and forgiven are liberated from the prison of unresolved hurt. I want to touch briefly on breaking generational patterns of unforgiveness because forgiveness interrupts these inherited cycles of hurt, the hurt that leads to no wisdom because you're not honoring the suffering. Psychology shows that unresolved trauma and unforgiveness patterns are passed to children through modeling, attachment styles, and emotional atmosphere. And when someone chooses forgiveness, they literally interrupt those generational cycles of bitterness, creating new possibilities for their children and the community that they interact with at large. Forgiveness also demonstrates participation in divine power and having a spiritual authority over yourself and the way that you're going to interact with the world and why. What's the drive behind the way you interact with the world? First, the ability to forgive what seems unforgivable is one of the clearest demonstrations of spiritual transformation. It shows that divine love is working through not only your heart, but your head. And forgiveness that transcends natural human response serves as a powerful witness to God's reality and character, both to the forgiver and to the observer. Now, when we're looking to restore and reconciliate a relationship, if you find yourself in that space and it is safe for you to do so. When we're looking to repair a relationship, forgiveness enables authentic reconciliation. Psychology shows that genuine reconciliation requires both forgiveness, which is releasing that resentment, and rebuilding trust, which is demonstrated through the change of behavior over time. Forgiveness makes reconciliation possible by removing the emotional barriers that were previously keeping honest conversation from happening and vulnerability from being able to come through. Reconciliation requires additional work from both parties, but also gives the offender the opportunity to be able to say they're sorry and ask for your forgiveness, even though you presented them with the forgiveness because you brought that to them first. Discussing your individual impact with forgiveness, there is an inexplicable link between individual forgiveness and how it affects a broader scope of social health. When individuals model forgiveness in families and communities, it creates permission and pathways for others to do the same thing and to be able to address their resentments and hurts in a functional, healthy manner that can also be passed down and passed around left, right, up, down. Forgiveness has documented county and community-wide effects, reducing conflict, increasing cooperation, and creating more psychologically safe environments for everyone within the community. Human forgiveness also participates in God's redemptive work, and that divine partnership, once you become a part of it, feels so good inside. When we forgive, we become co-partners with God in the restoration of broken relationships and wounded hearts. Not only our own wounded heart, but the person we are in resentment traps with. And forgiveness becomes almost like a pathway or a channel for divine healing that you get to kick off, right? Like you get to decide that forgiveness is a way that God designed us to be able to participate in his work of reconciliation and restoration of the church, his children, the people. So wrapping it up, how do we model perfect forgiveness? Certainly, we have Jesus's example, and he provided a really beautiful psychological template for forgiveness. Jesus' forgiveness of his killers demonstrates forgiveness that's independent of the offender's remorse or change. This unconditional forgiveness provides maximum psychological benefit to the forgiver. As he was dying on the cross, he literally looked up to God and said, God, forgive them. They don't know what they do. He literally asked for them to be forgiven on their judgment day when they die, when they meet God. What a immeasurably difficult thing to be able to do. And we may fall absolutely mountain lengths short of that, of Jesus's impact and the way he was so giving with his forgiveness, but we can try. We can shoot for the stars, right? The cross also shows that forgiveness doesn't require minimizing harm or excusing behavior. Jesus acknowledged that sinfulness of sin while simultaneously forgiving sin. He was suffering through the sin of others' actions while he was brutally dying on the cross, while simultaneously being able to forgive them because he could see that their hearts were not open to the infinite and magical, wise love of God, the same God that was in front of them being crucified. Empowerment through identification is how Christ's forgiveness enables our forgiveness. What am I talking about? Psychological research shows that people forgive more easily when they feel supported and understood. And Christ's experience of betrayal and hurt enables us to feel less alone in our pain. If this person, Jesus, could forgive his murderers while actively painfully suffering in excruciating moments of just, oh my gosh, this is my reality. This is what I'm doing right now, while also simultaneously feeling empathy for those who did not know what they were doing and the gravity of what they were doing. He cared for them while simultaneously being just so sad for himself. And the knowledge that God understands our hurt and has forgiven infinitely worse offenses provides the emotional and spiritual resources needed for us being able to, seemingly get over impossible forgivenesses, because truly there's not much on earth that you could really kind of stand there and be like, well, Jesus, this was worse than you. Of course there are tragedies. Of course there are tragedies, right? But by and by, and all in all, most of your life is pretty easy, friend. And getting to a space to where you don't want to hold on to that resentment anymore is going to free you in ways you do not expect. And I say that as a person that is walking this walk right now and taking this journey. And I want to encourage you to not only look for the grace during this transformation, but give yourself grace, right? Receiving forgiveness enables giving forgiveness. So when you muster up the courage to forgive someone, you're also giving them the authority to forgive someone that they hold a grudge against in their life. Okay, let's get down to the nitty gritty before I leave you. Okay. Forgiveness versus reconciliation. This is big, 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 big. We have to clarify this for the psychological distinction. Forgiveness is an internal process of releasing resentment that can happen regardless of the other person's response, while reconciliation is a relational process that requires mutual participation. You can forgive someone that's died. You can forgive someone that refuses to, accept their wrongdoing, their trespassings against you, but you can't expect your forgiveness to elicit change if they are not willing to change. It's like that adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So don't expect that your forgiveness is going to bring some magical band-aid over the issue that led you to have this resentment in the first place. Not all forgiveness is going to lead to a reconciliation with a person. So just know that in your heart, there are going to be moments where that reconciliation is just not in the cards, and that's okay. And you're being saved from something you're not aware of yet. There's also a little bit of discernment needed for forgiveness versus enabling. This is huge, especially if you have family members that you have been cajoled your whole life into enabling, or maybe, ex-partners that were bad people. Forgiveness doesn't require trusting someone who hasn't demonstrated trustworthiness or removing natural consequences of their harmful behavior and the actions that should come from it. Healthy forgiveness includes setting boundaries to prevent them from being able to trespass against you again, right? Like, we need to put up that fence so they can't cross your property, while we release personal resentments we have attached to those hurts that they gave us. One final thing I want you to think about is a perspective exercise. To understand the pain, the fear, or the brokenness that might have contributed to someone's harmful behavior against you, it's not excusing their actions. It's not, we're not looking to like free them from what they did to you. We're looking to free ourselves from what they did to you. And you can reduce personal resentment while not excusing their actions. These things are not inextricably tied. If this exercise is difficult for you, consider how you've hurt others when you were in pain, afraid, acting from your own wounds. This is going to help you to develop humility that makes forgiveness easier. Let's say like you had a crappy day at work and you come home and your husband's cooking dinner and you're like, hamburgers again? I don't want to eat this. It's like, whoa, that was a really crappy thing to say, first of all. Second of all, don't take your day out on him. He was doing something nice for you, and here you are poo-pooing on the parade because you couldn't handle the emotional overwhelm of this situation that you refuse to give resentment, or you refuse to give forgiveness to, and instead are holding on to resentment. Gosh, this was a huge episode. I could literally keep going. I have so many notes here. I hate to part two ya, but I might part two ya. Let me see. What can we kick out here? Let's talk about moving forward. Forgiveness inventory is huge. Identifying current areas of unforgiveness in your life. Make a list of the people you haven't forgiven, including yourself, and notice what emotions arise when you think about each relationship or situation. And then start with the easiest person on your list and practice forgiveness techniques with smaller hurts to build the capacity to handle the bigger hurts. You don't even need to speak to this person. This is a process you can do by yourself. It can be a simple just, you know what, Granny? You're so nasty to me and you called me all the meanest names and I never got to have a relationship with you and you never hugged me or gave me kisses. And like, I just really resented you for like taking away the grandma experience from me that most children get. She's dead, so I can't tell her that. But if she was alive, I would. But since I can't, I'm not going to fret over it. I'm just going to say these things out loud like I just did to you here. I'm going to say a prayer to God and thank him for the foresight to even address this hurt inside of myself. And I'm going to let it go and give it to God. And then I'm going to move on. Not all of them will be that easy. A lot of them will be really difficult. You might find yourself crying over it. You might find yourself feeling like the moment just happened again. And when it does, remember, you are not alone. God is with you. God has been through the trials and the tribulations of all sizes, all shapes, all forms. And he's with you throughout yours. And he knows what your heart wants, and he's going to work with you. But you have to work with yourself first. And that is the key. Do not block your blessings out of resentment. Do not block the growth that is waiting for you, not only with God, but within yourself. You deserve to live a life free of resentment. You deserve to live a life where forgiveness is your first reaction. I myself am still working there day in and day out. I don't know that it's something we'll all be able to achieve at 100% capacity. We are not perfect, but I'm dang sure going to try, and I hope that you do too. My Richies, this has been a great episode. I'm going to cap it here. There's no part two. This is all of it. If you like this conversation, if you like this topic, please let me know in the comments. It means a lot to me to bring you the conversations that you're looking for. And I just want to make sure we're all growing together 1% a day, better and better, closer to the Lord and closer to our hearts. My Richies, as always, it has been an absolute pleasure, and make life rich. God bless.